Was Grandma's loaf pan better than yours? I tested my 80-year-old loaf pan against my modern Le Creuset stoneware to see which one baked the best, and there was a clear winner, but I was pretty surprised why. My kitchen is about 90% vintage, mainly for two reasons. First is quality, and second is looks. When a modern version is better quality and better looking, I don't let loyalty to vintage stand in the way of a great bake. So when I find beautiful modern kitchenware, I love seeing how my vintage pieces perform in comparison. And aesthetically, Le Creuset can absolutely stand up to even the prettiest vintage piece. I mean, look at this blue. It's perfect. And then there's the vintage pan. This is depression glass ovenware made by Federal Glass, and this granny chic cutie is undeniably pretty. Very different from the chic modern looks of Le Creuset, but just as pretty by any standard. So I'd say they're about even on looks. I'd love to know your opinion though, so please comment if you have any strong feelings on it. So it really comes down to performance. Who baked it better? I made a vintage vegan cake recipe recently that called for 2 loaf pans, so it was the perfect opportunity to test them side by side. First test was how much or little the cake stuck to the pans. This was a particularly sticky cake and dark in color, so it was easy to tell which came out on top or didn't come out at all. Both cakes slipped out just fine, with no large pieces left behind, but the vintage pan came out very easily without any effort, while the modern took quite a bit of banging and shaking to get out. Not a big deal, but worth mentioning. The biggest difference between the two was what was left behind in the pan. The vintage pan was nearly clean, with only a very thin layer of crumbs left. The modern pan had a much more significant layer of crumbs left behind. No big pieces, but it was a noticeable difference. So it really came down to which one made the better cake, and I was pretty surprised. The Le Creuset cake rose a bit better, with more of a dome, while the vintage cake was a bit flatter on top, so visually, the Le Creuset won. But when it came down to taste, the vintage blew the modern away. The Federal Glass cake was so much more moist and tender. The modern was significantly drier and more crumbly, almost too dry to enjoy. The vintage was so much more velvety and decadent than the Le Creuset, and I have no idea why, but the results speak for themselves. They were baked at the same time on the same oven rack in the same oven, and I honestly thought the narrower shape and thicker walls of the modern pan would make for a moister cake, but it was the opposite. Vintage won the taste test by a wide margin. It's also worth mentioning cost between these two. It's not really fair, because I got my vintage pan for $1 at the thrift store, but you can easily find this exact pan for less than $10. The Le Creuset is $60 new, and the cheapest I could find used was $40. So there's a pretty big difference in cost. So it looks like Grandma's was definitely better than my top-of-the-line modern loaf pan, and I'll keep using my vintage one for a moister, tastier bake. I would love to know if you have any Grandma's was better kitchenware. And if you want to see more modern versus vintage comparisons, be sure to follow me.